Welcome back to this final episode of Erasing Data for Good. My name is Christina Walker. I'm the Global Director for Channel at Blanco, and I'm going to be your host for today. So, over the last 3 sessions, we've had an introduction to data sanitization, a look at security and compliance requirements and how to achieve them, and then in our last episode, we discussed the environmental impact of improper methods of data sanitization. But today we're going to turn our attention to more automating the data erasure process into existing or new processes, which can include ServiceNow. And I'm joined by 2 expert panelists, very excited to have them on with us. First up, we have Ramanan Devarajan, the Global Head of Digital Infrastructure, Network, and Metaverse Alliances at Tata Consultancy Services. Ramanan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why this topic's important in your world?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Christina. So, hi, everyone. A very good morning. I'm Ramanan Devarajan, Head of Partner Sales, leading the infrastructure, metaverse, 5G partnerships globally for Tata Consultancy Services. I'm at TCS for over 27 years. TCS is a $28 billion system integration and consulting company with over 600,000 employees working for us, with a market cap of 150 billion. And TCS is part of the Tata Group, which is a 125 billion conglomerate, which also owns Jaguar, Land Rover, and other leading companies. I thank all of you for taking time out, and especially thank Christina and the Blanco team for providing me this opportunity. This is a very critical topic, which is the need of the hour, I would say, because we can't look data erasure as just data erasure, because it is linked to several other initiatives and the world's most demanding thing, which is ESG, environment, social, and governance as well, which obviously we are going to discuss in this panel. Thanks, Christina.
Hey, thanks, Ramanan. Also joining me is Yari Soloma. Yari, please let us know about your role and your experience in this area as well.
Good morning, Christina from San Francisco. So my name is Yari Saloma, and it's really my pleasure to join this exciting topic around data sanitization and workflow automation. So for a quick introduction, until end of last year, I was the Senior Director of Platform Product Management at ServiceNow. And I worked with all kinds of platform technologies ranging from authorization and access to data and data protection and encryption and data privacy, helping ServiceNow to grow towards regulated industries and bringing more sensitive data into ServiceNow. And now I'm working as a consultant, advisor, also a board member, and on many exciting security and privacy projects. And data sanitization, of course, is one of my favorite topics, and it's also very timely and important when we look at the overall burden of like IT teams and IT security teams and all the asks, for even also compliance teams from the overall workload perspective. And I think there's a growing number of IT assets and hardware and software and integrations and a lot going on, and I think there's constant pressure from CEOs and CIOs that they're putting on the IT teams to do more and more with the same, or even in some cases, even with fewer resources. So what's really can be a solution, of course, is automation. So really excited for the conversation ahead.
Me too. Thank you both so much for being here to share your expertise with our audience. So before we dive into the discussion, audience, I wanted to let you know that you can submit questions directly to our panel. We will either answer live if time allows, but if not, we will get back to you after today's session. Of course, you can use the live chat functionality to share your thoughts on the topics being discussed, and use the reaction button if you hear something that you like. Well, I'm going to dive into our discussion, gentlemen, that I'm very excited to start out with. So in this series so far, we've covered the basics of data sanitization and how sanitizing through data erasure benefits the environment and reinforces data security. But for organizations, as you stated, Yari, it's really important to get this end-of-life data destruction process right in order for us to reduce the risk of data breach or non-compliance. So I really want to talk about automating data erasure in live and active context. Why is that automation a valuable asset for organization. Mr. Ramanan, do you have some ideas around what the motivator is and why it is so valuable?
Yeah, thanks, Christina. So let me put some context to this, the whole thing. So if you look at some of the statistics about data, the world generates 1,000 petabytes of data every day, which is close to 1 exabyte. And in 2018, the data which was generated globally was 33 zettabytes, which is a ZB. And in 2022, it was 100 zettabytes. And this is expected to grow to 175 zettabytes in 2025. And over 60% of this data is in cloud. YouTube alone contains 1.4 zettabyte of videos. So that's the kind of a scale of data what we are talking about, which keeps generating. And there are 20,000 data centers across the world with IT spending on data center systems, which has crossed over 200 billion this year. Right? Imagine how much of data will be generated in future with over 20 billion IoT devices, billions of smartphones, and enterprise data lakes, cloud, especially with storage costs getting cheaper. In a recent study, which suggests 15% of the data in an organization as only business critical, wherein 35% is deemed as redundant, obsolete, or trivial. And the rest 50% is unclassified or holds no value. Unwanted data in an organization is a liability to both the organization and the earth from a ESG perspective. And if you really take the market perspective of ITSM, which is IT service management, in 2030, the market is projected to reach about $7 billion, and automation is projected to reach about 77 billion with the increasing adaptation of Industry 4.0 and so on. And data erasure solution market size is projected to grow about 6 billion in 2030, right? So this is the statistics from a perspective of how data has to be pursued. Now let us look at the critical elements in this digital era, like what we call as CIAS, cloud security, intelligence, and automation, which predominantly drives this digital age. So we have something called as a cloud first approach. We have moved to cloud smart strategy now because of the given conditions of the market and the increasing hybrid cloud aspects. And automation is key to innovation. So we adapt something called as a machine first delivery model, or MFDM, for pace and avoiding human errors, right? So that automation plays a critical role in this whole scenario of how the data is assessed. And obviously, security threat is a nightmare for every organization and individuals with upcoming newer things like hacking as a services, which is called as HAS, right? It is not too far from what we are today. And also, let's look at ESG, which is the environment, social, and governance, which is a key thing, which is everyone is worried about the aspect where data erasure can play a vital role. For example, world has produced over 8.3 billion tons of plastics, and only 9% are recycled, and rest end up in landfills to ocean, carried by 9 major rivers, which impacts ocean bed and millions of species, and so the earth. The carbon emission to the atmosphere increased from 6 gigatons in 1950 to 35 gigatons, impacting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, and is expected to rise 6 degrees. So we don't know what will be the impact of that, right? So we will run out of the carbon budgets in 4 years, as per the statistics, impacting the earth and the ecosystem. And there is no more circular economy, and the humans have clearly broken the closed chain. So which is a concern to everyone, organizations and the governments and so on, because we live in the earth. Now, if you look at from an ESG perspective, data erasure plays a vital role. For example, if you take environment perspective, excess storage emits immense carbon emission, impacting environment, and reuse refurbished tools helps environment waste to be contained from not ending up in landfills. Also, less use of storage saves power consumption and emission, right? So this is
Right.
from an environment perspective. And from a social perspective, creating positive customer employee experience with data production and data sanitization is a very key. And lastly, from a governance perspective, governance and compliance, policy driven data erasure helps our regulatory reporting, lack of which leads to fines, lawsuits, reputation damage, and customer churn. For example, financial institutions, we all see the news, they all keep paying billions to regulatory agencies. Hence, automated data erasure is critical, not just encrypted or manual erasure. So automated data erasure and sanitization is need of the hour for corporates, organization, and for the larger world, which is critical avenue to address the environment problem at hand. And it's important to build a clear digital immune system proactively so that we are all saved.
So if I can summarize what I listened to, Mr. Ronan, it's you've got the critical elements that data erasure is applicable to, the security, the compliance, and the ESG, and making sure that it's automated, given how much data is starting to grow across the world, and a significant amount of that is ROT data. Making that an automated process helps reduce the risk, especially from a security and being able to be appliant to regulation and compliance. Jari, anything you want to add on top of that?
I think Mr. Ramanan summarized it pretty well, but maybe a couple of points to add from practicality standpoint, maybe from an IT team or an IT persona is that I think one of the things they also struggle in this data explosion is to know whether the data is stored in the right place. Should it be there at all in the right system and tools? And when we think about, most organizations, they use hundreds of different tools and services and different types of devices, and it increases constantly complexity of that you have a growing data volume, and organizations are using automated data discovery and data classification tools and trying to see whether data should be in the right place, and then using data protection, encryption, and different mechanisms of layer. And when we think about these are very important processes, and but as long as organizations also think about the human aspect, that humans are always prone to error and maybe not always doing the right thing. So even how much training you provide, and you have policy-based organizations that but at the end, automation kind of minimizes the human risk and the human error in their kind of daily operations. But yeah, great summary, Mr. Rahman. Thank you.
That's a really good point, Jari. And it kind of brings me to another point I wanted to discuss. So, when you're talking about the automation and the reduction of human error, absolutely. It also seems like it would also be a huge time savings here. So not to mention a lot of assurance and knowing that as you both pointed out, unneeded data is overwritten immediately, or it's part of a regular interval, depending upon the organization and how their security or compliance policies go. But what are other benefits? You mentioned one, Jari, about reduction in human error, but what are the other benefits of automating this process?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Christina. So, if we, obviously there are different kinds of organizations, but if we generalize, I would say that most enterprises today are rather complex in regards to their integrations. And you might have organizations that are data centric, might have data centers, they have servers, routers. There's a lot to think about around updates and keeping the machines up to date, patches, different parts, cables, accessories. There's just a lot to kind of bringing in new technology to your organization to maintain productivity and kind of keeping the organization on the edge, compared to competition. And then you have to decommission the old, you're constantly having to kind of understand and think about life cycle of your employee assets or your production infrastructure And so how you build a process, I think it's really important. And for that, I'd like to bring like two main points. Like one is this kind of lack of standards and process. So when, I think organizations that don't have standardized process, I think have higher cost. And you also kind of like introduce people into the process, and you need to train the people, and then you're kind of introducing risk with the people working with the lack of standards and process. So, and then also I think you're challenging with the visibility into the process. So organizations that are then embracing standardized processes, let's say for like IT asset management or hardware asset management, and thinking about like your data sanitization practices and like ensuring you have your abide with any kind of data sanitization or data minimization best practices, and you've kind of like ensuring your compliance posture with audit ready certificates, and you're kind of like automating a lot of these parts of the data life cycle. You're kind of reducing risk of a breach, of course, but you're also kind of like eliminating this like human error and obviously huge productivity savings. And just a few weeks ago, I met a customer in Chicago, for instance, who was going like through a volume of 300 assets manually. And now, of course, if you think about automation, like that's a lot of coffee or tea the IT can go and drink during the manual process of going through that many assets manually. So
that's important, actually, very important, Yari, the coffee tea. But it kind of you touch on something right then, that it's really, it does reduce the pressure on the labor needs. In the labor market, sometimes they're looking for high level specialists in the IT world, but if you're able to get them to focus on specific sets of activities they need to do in that environment, whatever it may be, then using the data erasure or anything that's really just an easy process can be automated. Those team members, as they're struggling to bring in labor, can focus on more targeted things they need to do that's critical to the business as well.
Totally
Mr. Ramana,
agree.
any points on top of that as well?
No, I can't agree more with Harry. It's very well summarized.
So speaking of, where we go from labor and some touch points we talked on earlier, but automation is also becoming more embedded within just data security workflows in aggregate, in total, AI and automation. And much of that's based upon workflows that are set. So if you can tell me a little bit about the value of customizing workflows in an enterprise environment for managing devices, and why that could be actually really important, especially from a security angle. Mr. Ramanan, I'm gonna ask you first to highlight a little bit more around that point.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the aspects from an automation perspective is like with widespread adaptation of adoption of Industry 4.0 and emerging digital industrialization, such as IIoT, which is Industrial Internet of Things, has really forced the organizations to adapt to automation in the last few years. Since there's a greater need to mitigate human errors, save time, improve performance and governance with high quality and reliable operations. Security perspective, it's like data breach has become a new norm with news from our healthcare providers, banks, custodians, stating our data has been compromised, which has become a new norm. It's no more surprises. And with a massive increase in data, in my view, it's simply unmanageable. And hence, it is very critical to have a customized workflow-driven data policy without judgmental human error, for better words. Redundant data is a liability, as I mentioned earlier, and enterprise continue to ignore this perhaps for short-term gains, and will have to pay dearly in the long run, which will create disruptions from a business perspective, customer loyalty, supply chain, and with massive revenue impact down the line.
Absolutely.
Some thoughts on data classification, which is along with this automation adaptations, are perhaps like what intelligence agencies are known for their strict data classification policies, from for official use only to top state secret or Five Eyes only, or the larger organizations with identifying the crown jewels, for example, the data that must be protected at any cost, such as Coke's legendary secret formula or Boeing's jet engine design, and so on. So these are some of those automations related data classification which can help in the long term. And again, in this the current world, we have seen very few phases of we have seen a very different phase of digital criminology roles. People use like threat intelligence teams, ransomware negotiators, hacking groups, access brokers, minders, and so on. And hence, prevention, in my view, is always better than the cure. And leaked data cannot be a bait for such scenarios, which will impact in terms of a lot of loss of data revenue and so on. Organizations have to be proactive, not reactive. And I wanted to repeat some of those points made by Yari. Workflow automation is critical since customization will definitely help with greater visibility, higher operational efficiency, reduced time, skill issues, addressing compliance, and more than everything, it is a better collaborative working with all stakeholders in an organization,
Right.
which is getting a well-rounded view.
So, Yari, I'm going to pose a question to you. Why would a company not be interested or kind of hesitant about building workflows?
Right. Maybe I'll take a little bit longer answer here, but like when going back to the kind of the standardized process versus non-standard process, and kind of thinking about automation, you might have organizations that like today, like in the days of like ChatGPT and AI, I feel that like building software and building solutions is not that complex, but I kind of enrolling it and kind of like onboarding the process into an organization is much harder problem. And you have organizations who can then obviously build and create, and then you have organizations who kind of build things for others to use, maybe like software as a service, and you package workflows and you kind of drop them into your organization. So when we think of like, these out of the box solutions, like, Blanco secure data erasure for ServiceNow, it can be installed into your existing, IT asset management workflows. And then basically just you start kind of like adding Blanco data sanitization best practices into a workflow that you already use. And of course, like, you get to those outcomes faster. Now, of course, with customization, like, you have different organizations, like ServiceNow offers software asset management and enterprise asset management and hardware asset management, all kinds of capabilities. And I think organizations who have already implemented these type of workflows have the right mindset, of course, in a life cycle management thinking. And I feel that like, when you have an employee getting onboarded, how they get a new computer, or you're in a data center environment, you're constantly shipping and receiving, thinking about upgrades, making changes to your hardware specs, when assets are being shipped, how much you have in your stock room, all of those capabilities. So I think the short answer to your question, I think organizations really kind of have the opportunity and of course to go in a lot in their customization and create something their own, but there also lies in the risk that you go too far into the customization, and then maybe some challenges around using these out of the box capabilities that different organizations provide, and then innovate continuously. So for instance, here at Blanco, obviously continuously thinking about new features, capabilities, new form factors, and so forth.
Yeah. Thank you, Yari. So we have about 5 minutes left with our audience here. And I just want to highlight one other point that actually Mr. Ramanan, you mentioned earlier, but I'm going to cater this a little bit towards Yari as well, is, the specific industries that are critical to use, data security or being held to compliance and regulations. And can you tell me, Yari, just one last question I have for you is a little bit of share how automation has that made an impact in those key regulated industries?
Right. So industries is very interesting because obviously you have industries like healthcare and medical devices and, financial services and payments, and they're subject, as we know, to multiple laws. And there's also a growing number of fines to some of these organizations who have failed to protect their data. And, the workflows are not working. So the data has ended up in wrong places, outside the organization in wrong hands. And, I think there's two things happening right now. I think organizations are kind of getting ready in their budgets to pay more fines, and then also they're investing into digitalization of their workflows, for instance, for asset management and sensitive data minimization and risk reduction.
Yep. Great, thank you. We do have some Q&A from the crowd. So I really want to first thank you both for some incredible discussion around the automation, just in general in the market, as well as for data sanitization. One of the questions we have, and I'm not sure who would want to answer, but my guess might be Yari, is it's around the workflow discussion and the custom workflows. How do you handle devices that are remote?
That's a great question. So I would say that automation is working pretty well at home. I think many organizations really fine-tuned their asset shipping to employees over the pandemic. And, this similarly works with, I think, loaner devices and accessories and everything you might need in a home office environment. So I think the key thing to remember is the chain of custody and the kind of ability to request or automate the data erasure when the asset changes hands, and you're sending that to a disposition company or back to your IT, and then this way, the enterprise IT organization kind of can have a assurance of the certified erasure on their side of the fence, and similarly for any assets leaving kind of employee at home.
One of the points, another question that's come up. So I think Mr. Ramanan, you mentioned this early on, is how do we assess our data to know what needs to be kept? You mentioned ROT data. How is that assessment? Do you feel the best assessment's done? Is there something that TCS supports clients on? What does that look like in your world?
Yeah, so that's so from a classification perspective, obviously, you have many ways of doing it. It's absolutely, again, the customer preference, but then a lot of awareness has to be created on educating what is the must-to-have data, and what is the trivial data, and what is the unwanted data. But of course, for regulatory purpose, if you take a banking sector or medical healthcare, so sometimes it's very critical to maintain because of this regulatory status for 15 years or 9 years or 7 years, depending on what they have. So right. With those classification, it's very critical to ensure that those things which is important, critical, vital, or trivial is clearly articulated, so that automation takes the role of playing it and then putting it aside, so that the liability doesn't hit us in terms of having wrong data.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Gentlemen, we are out of time. It's been an incredible conversation with you both. I can't thank you enough for taking part. So for our audience, I wanted to let you know that all 4 episodes will be available soon to watch on demand. You can check it out on Blanco's website, blanco.com.